I turned 18 on a weekday, which felt fitting for my family. Birthdays weren't celebrations in our house. They were reminders that life doesn't stop just because you're getting older. My mom reminded me to take out the trash before school. My dad asked what time my shift ended. That was it. Then my aunt pulled into the driveway. She didn't come inside right away. She just stood there for a second, looking at the house like it weighed something inside her down. When she finally hugged me, she held on longer than normal. "I know it's not much," she said, pressing a set of keys into my palm. "But it's yours." The car was old, scratches along the side, a radio that only worked if you hit it just right. But when I sat in the driver's seat later, hands on the steering wheel, I felt something I'd never felt before. Choice. I could go to work without begging for a ride. I could stay late studying. I could sit somewhere quiet when home felt too loud. My parents smiled when they saw it. Not happy smiles, careful ones. My mom said it was sweet but unnecessary. My dad joked that I'd better not get ideas. They laughed like it was harmless. The first week was perfect. I drove everywhere, even nowhere. I took the long way home just because I could. The second week, the comments started. "You're never home. You seem distant lately. That car's really changed you." I didn't connect the dots yet. Then my aunt stopped replying to my texts. When I finally saw her again, she looked nervous, guilty, like she was about to confess to something she didn't fully understand. "They're worried about you," she said. "They think you're pulling away." I laughed at first. Then I saw her eyes. They had already planted the story, and I didn't know yet how far they were willing to take it. After that conversation, things started shifting in ways that were easy to miss if you weren't the one living inside them. My aunt didn't stop talking to me completely. She just became distant. Replies took days. Phone calls felt rushed. When I asked if everything was okay, she said she was just tired. At home, my parents grew calmer. Too calm. My mom started commenting on how often I was gone. My dad asked where I was driving so much. Not angry questions. Curious ones. Monitoring ones. One night at dinner, my mom sighed and said, "You know, independence is nice, but family should always come first." My dad nodded. Freedom can confuse young people. That's when I understood they weren't mad. They were afraid. A few days later, my aunt asked to come over. She didn't sit down when she arrived. She stayed standing, twisting her hands together, eyes darting toward my parents, like she expected them to appear at any second. "I think I made a mistake," she said quietly. My stomach dropped. She told me they had been calling her every day, saying they were worried, saying I wasn't the same, saying the car was making me reckless, distant, ungrateful. "They said you talk about leaving," she whispered. "They said I pushed you too fast." I told her the truth, that I still lived at home, that nothing had changed except my ability to get places without asking. She nodded, but doubt had already taken root. "I just don't want to hurt the family," she said. 2 days later, she asked for the car back. She cried when she said it, said she felt pressured, said she couldn't sleep, said maybe it was better this way. My parents didn't say a word. They didn't have to. I handed over the keys. That night, my mom hugged me and said, "See? Everything's back to normal." But nothing was normal anymore. Without the car, I was dependent again. Rides meant permission. Permission meant explanations. Explanations meant control. They checked my schedule, commented on my tone, noticed everything. And my aunt disappeared from family gatherings soon after. That's when it hit me. They didn't just take things away, they erased people who threatened their control. And I started paying attention, quietly. Once I stopped reacting, everything became clearer. My parents didn't escalate. They didn't need to. They relied on something subtler, routine pressure. Small comments, strategic silence, the kind of control that looks harmless from the outside. If I asked for a ride, my mom would sigh. If I worked late, my dad would remind me how unsafe it was. If I stayed quiet, they'd ask what I was hiding. They wanted me small again. So I got quieter. I started taking extra shifts. I saved cash in an envelope I hid inside an old textbook. I stopped sharing details about my life, not to punish them, to protect myself. That's when I noticed something important. They needed me, not emotionally, functionally. My paycheck helped with groceries. My presence helped with appearances. My compliance helped them feel in control of something when other parts of their lives weren't going the way they wanted. One night, my dad complained about bills while staring directly at me like the words were meant to land. "Family pulls together," he said. I nodded, but inside, something clicked. They weren't afraid of me failing. They were afraid of me leaving. That realization changed everything. A week later, I ran into my aunt at the grocery store. It wasn't planned. She looked surprised and relieved to see me alone. She asked how I was really doing. I told her, not emotionally, factually. I told her I still lived at home, that I hadn't changed, that the only difference the car made was that I didn't have to ask permission to exist. Her face tightened. Then she said something quietly, like she was afraid to hear herself say it. They said the same things when I helped my nephew move out. I didn't react. I let the silence do the work. She told me how they warned her she was destroying the family, how they said independence always leads to abandonment, how helping someone leave meant losing them forever. She had believed them, until now. That's when I understood this wasn't about me. It never had been. It was about anyone who challenged the idea that control equals love. We didn't confront them, not yet. She started paying attention instead. And my parents, confident they'd won, started repeating themselves. The same phrases, the same warnings, the same fear. Only this time, someone else was listening. And once someone hears the pattern, it's impossible to unhear it. The shift didn't happen all at once. It happened in side glances, half-finished sentences, and the way conversations stopped when someone else entered the room. My aunt didn't argue with my parents. She didn't accuse them. She did something far more dangerous. She listened. At the next family dinner, she stayed quiet while my dad talked about how kids today don't value family. My mom chimed in about how people get ideas when they're given too much freedom too early. Same words, same tone. This time my aunt didn't nod. She asked questions, not confrontational ones, curious ones. What kind of ideas? At what age does independence become disrespect? Is helping someone leave the same as abandoning them? My parents laughed it off at first, joked, deflected, but I could see it. The tightening around their mouths, the irritation creeping in, because questions don't submit. On the drive home, my mom complained about my aunt, said she was acting strange, said she'd become negative lately. The script was repeating. A few days later, my aunt called me. Her voice was calm, but careful. I remembered something, she said, when you were younger. She told me about a time she'd offered to help me go to a summer program out of state, how my parents shut it down immediately, how they told her I wasn't ready, that I'd struggle, that I needed to stay close. I believed them, she said quietly. I always did. That night, she told another relative the same story, and then another. Nothing dramatic, just memories, patterns, comparisons. People started connecting dots they hadn't known were related. My parents noticed. My dad started calling family members more often. My mom started checking in, old alliances being reinforced, damage control. At home, the tension grew sharp. My mom asked why my aunt was asking so many questions. My dad asked what I'd been saying. I said nothing. Silence unnerves people who rely on control. One evening, my dad snapped. "You think you're better than us now?" The question wasn't about pride, it was about fear. That night, I packed a bag. Not to leave yet, just to be ready. Because once people start seeing the truth, those who benefit from the lie panic. And panic makes people reckless. I didn't know what my parents would do next. But I knew one thing for sure. They were losing the room. The first crack showed up on a Sunday afternoon. My parents invited everyone over under the excuse of a casual family meal. No occasion, no reason, just togetherness. Their favorite stage. They acted warmer than usual. Too warm. My mom kept refilling glasses that weren't empty. My dad laughed louder than necessary. It felt rehearsed. Then my aunt arrived. She didn't come alone. She brought my cousin, the one who'd moved out years ago and was quietly successful now. The one my parents rarely mentioned anymore. That alone shifted the air. Dinner started harmlessly. Small talk, weather, work. Then my dad steered the conversation where he wanted it. "Kids rush these days," he said, cutting into his food. "They think independence fixes everything." My cousin looked up. "It fixed a lot for me." Silence. My mom smiled tightly. Not everyone has the same experience. My aunt set her fork down. Calm. Deliberate. "That's true," she said, "but it's interesting how often independence is framed as abandonment." My dad stiffened. "Families should stick together." "And does sticking together require staying?" my aunt asked. No one spoke. Then my cousin added gently, "You told me the same thing when I moved out." That was it. Not an accusation. A confirmation. I watched my parents' faces change, confusion giving way to anger, anger sliding into panic. They hadn't expected alignment. My mom recovered first. "This feels like an attack." My aunt shook her head. "It feels like a conversation you've avoided." My dad pushed his chair back. We're done with this. But conversations don't end just because someone declares it. After that day, the phone calls stopped coming from my parents. Instead, relatives started calling me, asking how I was, asking what my plans were. The narrative was breaking. At home, my parents became brittle. Every question felt like a challenge. Every silence felt suspicious. My mom accused me of turning people against them. I didn't argue. I didn't need to. Because the truth was doing the work for me now. Quietly, efficiently. And once control slips in front of witnesses, it never fully comes back. I started counting days. Not until they changed. Until I left. The house started to feel smaller after that dinner. Not physically, emotionally. Like the walls were listening, reporting back. My parents spoke to me carefully now, choosing words the way people do when they're afraid of being misquoted. My mom stopped asking where I was going. She asked when I'd be back. My dad stopped lecturing. He observed. Control doesn't always disappear. Sometimes it just adapts. One evening, my mom knocked on my door and sat on the edge of my bed like she used to when I was younger. Her voice softened. "We're worried about you," she said. "You've changed since that whole car situation." There it was again. The car. Always the symbol, never the truth. She told me people were talking, that family relationships were fragile, that independence was fine, but only if it didn't damage bonds. I listened. Then she said something she probably thought was comforting. "You don't need to rush growing up. You'll always have a place here." What she meant was, don't leave. The next day, my dad tried a different approach. He offered to help me with expenses, offered rides, offered flexibility. It almost sounded generous. Almost. But generosity with conditions is just leverage wearing a smile. Meanwhile, the rest of the family shifted around us. Invitations came without my parents attached. Conversations happened without them steering. People stopped asking for their opinions first. My aunt called me late one night. "They're scared," she said. "They're trying to lock things back down." I looked around my room. The posters from high school, the childhood desk, the suitcase I'd packed and unpacked twice already. I realized something then. They weren't trying to keep me safe. They were trying to keep me contained. So I made a decision. I stopped waiting for permission, silently. I confirmed my housing, increased my hours, moved my savings somewhere my parents couldn't see. At dinner, my dad asked casually, "You're not planning anything big, are you?" I smiled and said, "No." And for the first time, it wasn't a lie that hurt me to tell, because plans don't belong to the people you're escaping from. They belong to you, and mine were almost ready. The closer I got to leaving, the more my parents sensed it. Not because I said anything, I didn't, but because control has a way of recognizing when it's slipping. My mom started asking questions that sounded innocent on the surface. "Have you thought about taking fewer hours? Are you saving for something? Why are you so tired lately?" My dad went quieter. He watched instead of talked. That was always more dangerous. One night, I came home later than usual. Nothing dramatic, just a longer shift. My dad was waiting at the kitchen table. Not angry, calm. "We need to talk about your priorities," he said. I sat down. He talked about family unity, about loyalty, about how people who leave too early regret it later. He didn't mention money, but his eyes flicked toward my bag like he was inventorying me. Then he said it. "You wouldn't survive on your own right now." Not cruel, certain. I realized then that they didn't see me as inexperienced. They saw me as unfinished property. The next day, my mom accidentally mentioned how expensive rent was, how unreliable roommates could be, how people come back embarrassed after failing. Fear dressed as concern. That evening, my aunt called again. "They're calling people," she said, "trying to frame you as confused, impulsive." I wasn't surprised. What surprised me was how calm I felt. Because when people panic, they reveal exactly what they're afraid of losing. A few days later, my parents sat me down together. My mom spoke softly. My dad nodded along. They offered a deal. Stay home, save money, follow their rules. In exchange, they'd help me ease into adulthood. No mention of the car, no apology, no acknowledgement of what they'd done, just a contract. I looked at them and realized something important. They truly believed this was generous. I thanked them. I said I'd think about it. That night, I zipped my suitcase all the way closed for the first time. Because once someone offers you a cage disguised as support, the only real choice left is to walk away. Quietly and soon. I didn't tell them when I left. I waited for a morning when the house was quiet. The kind of quiet that only happens when people are certain nothing is changing. I packed the last of my things while the sun was still low. No dramatic exits, no notes. Just a door closing the way it had closed every day of my life. Only this time, I didn't come back. My aunt picked me up a few blocks away. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't ask questions. She just handed me a coffee and drove. That restraint meant more than comfort ever could. When my parents realized I was gone, the messages started slow. "Where are you? Call us. We're worried." Then they turned sharp. "You're being irresponsible. You're letting people influence you. This isn't how family works." I didn't respond. Silence isn't punishment. It's a boundary. By the third day, the story shifted. Relatives started hearing a different version. That I'd stormed out, that I was unstable, that I'd been manipulated. But the timing betrayed them. Too neat, too sudden. People had already seen the pattern. My aunt didn't defend me. She didn't need to. She simply told the truth when asked. She wanted space. She planned carefully. She wasn't running, she was leaving. Those words landed heavier than any argument. My parents showed up at my aunt's house once, unannounced, angry, controlled, desperate. They demanded to see me. She told them no. Not loudly, not emotionally, just no. That was new. They didn't know how to fight it. For the first time, they weren't the ones deciding who spoke to whom, or when, or why. At night, alone in my new place, the quiet felt different. Not empty, open. No footsteps tracking me, no questions waiting at the door, no sense of being watched. I thought about the car sometimes, about how temporary freedom had scared them more than years of obedience ever comforted them. They lost more than control when they took it back. They lost access. And once access is gone, power has nothing to stand on. I slept better than I ever had. And I knew they felt it. Because people who rely on control don't fear distance. They fear irrelevance. The silence didn't make them disappear. It made them louder, just not to me. Friends told me later how my parents kept repeating the same lines, that I was confused, that I'd been influenced, that I'd come back once I realized how hard life really was. They waited for my failure. Weeks passed. I didn't fail. I struggled, sure. Rent hurt. Long shifts hurt. Some nights I sat on the edge of the bed wondering if rest ever really came, but the struggle felt honest. No one was watching my tone. No one was measuring my gratitude. No one was quietly deciding what I was allowed to want. That was new. My aunt told me my mom had started crying to relatives, saying she didn't understand how things got so bad. My dad stopped calling altogether. Silence as punishment, hoping I'd chase it. I didn't. Then came the message I'd been expecting. Not an apology, an invitation. "Dinner this weekend," my mom wrote. "We should talk like adults." I stared at it for a long time, because talking like adults requires equality. And they still thought they had authority. I didn't respond. A few days later, my aunt forwarded me something, a message my dad had sent her. "We just want things back the way they were." There it was. Not better, not healthier, not honest, just back. That's when I understood the final piece. They didn't miss me. They missed the version of me that stayed. The one who explained herself. The one who accepted guilt as love. The one who didn't challenge the story. I wasn't that person anymore. And they knew it. That realization didn't hurt. It freed me. Because once you stop trying to be understood by people who benefit from misunderstanding you, something lifts. I deleted the message. I went to work. I came home to my own space. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for my life to start. It already had. And they were no longer part of the decision. I didn't hear from them for a long time after that. No calls. No messages, just quiet. The kind that feels intentional, like waiting someone out. Life kept moving anyway. I learned which bills could be paid late and which couldn't. I learned how to cook 3 meals on rotation and still feel like I'd eaten something real. I learned that exhaustion hits differently when it belongs to you. Months later, I ran into my parents by accident. A grocery store, middle of the afternoon. They looked older, smaller, not defeated, just unsure. My mom smiled first. Careful, testing. My dad nodded like this was a neutral encounter. We talked about nothing. Weather, work, traffic. They didn't ask where I lived. They didn't ask how I was doing. They didn't ask if I needed anything. Because asking would mean acknowledging I didn't need them. As we stood there, my mom said softly, "You know, things didn't have to be this way." I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel angry, or sad, or guilty. I just felt clear. They didn't have to be, I said. But they were. My dad opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing left that worked. We said goodbye. I walked out alone. In the parking lot, I thought about the car, the gift that lasted only long enough to show me what was possible. They thought taking it back would shrink me. Instead, it taught me how little they were willing to let me grow. Control doesn't always look like cruelty. Sometimes it looks like concern. Sometimes it looks like family. But love doesn't need permission, and freedom doesn't ask politely. They lost the version of me they could manage. I gained the version of myself I could live with, and that was the only ending that mattered.